In this episode, we talk to David Robson, an award-winning journalist who's worked for the BBC, Guardian, Times, Telegraph and Washington Post, about his fantastic book, The Expectation Effect. The book delves into the research around how not only our own, but others' beliefs and expectations can shape our reality.
We talk about the nocebo and placebo effect, the power of reframing, the performance gains from visualisation and paradoxes around food and happiness. We also chat about ageing and how our own attitude to ageing can determine not only the quality of our life, but our longevity. You're going to find this fascinating, and there are so many takeaway suggestions that you can start applying, start altering your expectations and ultimately your outcomes for the better. Hi, I'm James Davis.
And I'm Claire Davis.
We're the Midlife Mentors, here to lift the lid on how to achieve health and happiness.
The balanced, no-nonsense way.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Midlife Mentors with me, James.
And me, Claire. How are you? Now, I am going to be very British and talk about the weather again, because every time we've recorded this, it's been miserable outside in London, but it's bright sunshine, which means I'm happy.
Well, Claire, we're going to learn an interesting fact, or many interesting facts from our guests today. Maybe you should just learn to expect good weather.
I knew you were about to say that. I knew you were about to say that. I wish I had that much control over the weather, to be honest.
Don't we all?
I know.
We all living in this country.
I know. So what have you been up to? I'm just trying to. We were just before we jumped on thinking, what have we been up to? Well, it was only a few days ago we recorded the last one.
We filmed some videos for Midlife Method. We've put those in the app.
Yeah.
And we're very excited. By the time this goes live, our new Midlife Health and Happiness quiz should be live. So you should be able to take this quiz.
Yes.
And get a personalised report and get actionable steps from it. It's kind of give you your midlife health and happiness style and get some actionable steps. So fingers crossed that will be live by the time this goes out, and we will put the link in the show notes.
Yeah, it's basically, James and I have been building this actually for a few months now, but it's a really, really amazing way for you to see where you are scoring high on some of the midlife health and happiness issues that we cover in the Midlife Method, and where some of the improvements that could be made. And then, as James said, you've got a downloadable report, but then you also have a video where we give hints and tips on how, strategies on how to improve some of those areas so you thrive at midlife. So that, now James has said it, is going to have to be in the podcast show notes.
Make it so.
I know. It's nothing like a bit of pressure.
Okay, so we're very excited. So we've got an amazing guest today, actually. So we're joined by David Robson, an award-winning journalist. He's worked for the BBC, the Guardian, the Times, Telegraph, Washington Post, amongst others. And his first book, The Intelligence Trap, was translated into 15 languages. And today we're talking to him about his amazing book, which I guess is all around the work of positive psychology and beliefs and expectations. It's called The Expectation Effect. It was Radio 4 Book of the Week. And David, welcome.
Welcome. We love this stuff. We love talking about this stuff, David.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Good.
Awesome. Well, you obviously put so much work into this book. It covers so much ground. There's so much research in there. I think maybe a better if you just slightly introduced it, but it's really fascinating to us, like how much your beliefs and expectation can shape your reality and your destiny ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is the thesis of the expectation effect, that our beliefs really can create these self-fulfilling prophecies. And I say that it does this through three main mechanisms, which is changes to our perceptions, changes to our behavior, and changes to our physiology. It's all based on really robust science. And so what I'm not saying is that just by changing our beliefs alone, that we can, achieve absolute miracles. Like, I'm not saying that you can manifest being rich and suddenly you're going to win the lottery. I'm not saying that you can cure cancer just by positive thinking. But the fact that you can't, do these kind of supernatural miracles doesn't mean that our expectations aren't still incredibly powerful. And they really do have a huge effect on all kinds of outcomes. So, it could be like how productive your workouts are. how easy you find it to go on a diet, and actually, whether you get those hunger pangs later on. There's even research showing that your expectations about aging can determine how long you live. So, these are all things that we should be considering. The fact is, we're influenced by expectation effects all day, every day. We're just often not aware of it. And that's what the book is really trying to do, is to tell people, when it's happening, how to change your expectations so that you can make the most of the power of the brain's predictive processing.
I love that. It's so powerful. And what's fascinating as well is it's not just our own expectations, but what other people can say to us can also have an effect as well. So you start the story with the incredible, that Harvard study with the hotel cleaners that were basically told, oh, the work you're doing is really hard and make you should be the toppest, fittest people. And they all went on and lost weight without changing anything else in their lifestyle.
Yeah, that's what happened. I would have to say, emphasize that these researchers were actually telling these cleaners the truth about their work as well. It's not like there was any deception going on, but the fact is that, hoovering, changing, the sheets on a mattress, cleaning the windows, cleaning the toilets, moving furniture, that actually burns a lot of calories. So these cleaners were getting the kind of recommended amount of exercise each week. They just weren't interpreting their work as being physically demanding in that way. It wasn't like they felt when they were going to the gym. And what the researchers were doing was just kind of helping them to reframe their jobs in this way. So it's helping them to just appreciate, the benefits that they could get from that work. And the researchers kind of were, they wanted to find out if this could create this kind of placebo effect, which we know has real physiological outcomes in medicine, but could it be applied outside of the hospital or doctor's clinic, just in someone's daily work? And they found that it did. So after having told these cleaners, about the physical benefits of their work and how demanding it was, those cleaners actually saw a clinically significant reduction in their blood pressure, and like you say, they seemed to lose a couple of pounds as well. So it's really exciting stuff. And that was really one of the key studies, I think, that then triggered interest in the expectation effect more generally, because that was really when it became clear that actually just how widespread expectation effects can be in all areas of lives.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's really fascinating, just like that, by reframing their perception of what they're doing, that there was actually a physiological effect from it. It's amazing. This is the stuff that we love and we work with on our clients all the time. So it's great to speak to you about this. The other thing that I was fascinated by was complaining good sleepers. So people who actually sleep well but think I had a terrible night's sleep, actually have a worse performance the next day than people who genuinely did sleep badly but didn't think they did. That's fascinating.
I do know someone a little bit like that, though.
Wow, just because of all the housework you get me doing, and it's exhausting, which you've heard.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, my partner's a complaining good sleeper as well, and I would say I'm a non-complaining bad sleeper actually. So I could, often spend a few hours a night kind of laying awake, but then I'll kind of get up in the morning and think, well, even though I lost that sleep, I kind of slept okay for the other few hours, and didn't have any kind of bad outcomes. Whereas he might stay awake for 15 minutes because of a car alarm, and he thinks he's like the next day is a write-off.
It's a write-off. Oh, I slept really badly.
Monkey.
Do you know what? This just leads me to actually why I'm not a massive fan actually of wearables. Things that check our sleep, check how many calories we burn and all that sort of thing. I think it is a really great incentive for some people that don't move, and some people that aren't particularly connected to, I don't know, like themselves and their physicality. But one of the reasons that I'm not a massive fan is because we did actually have a company gift us these wearables. I won't say which ones they are, but we had these wearables on a couple of years ago, and it just became a bit obsessive actually. So the expectation of it changed my perception of what my expectations were, if that makes sense. So I thought that I was a really bad sleeper, and it actually kind of showed me that I was in and out of sleep. But what I noticed was I then started becoming very obsessive and expecting to sleep badly, and therefore my sleep got worse by by having this wearable on, and then obviously yours showed you that you slept quite well.
But on the days that it told me I had a bad sleep, then I'd be like, if I woke up feeling fine, I'd be like, oh, well then I must feel fatigued and tired. It was really interesting.
Yeah, that's why I'm not a fan of wearables.
No, I mean, I think I do have issues with wearables, in that I think, like, especially with something like sleep, I don't think that they're going to be so accurate. And so there is the chance that they're creating kind of more needlessly negative expectations about people's sleep. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, I think the positive of something like a Fitbit or like an Apple Watch is that it does help you to recognize when you are doing exercise. So those hotel cleaners may well have realized how many calories they were burning if they had been wearing a wearable. So in that case, I think it can be quite good for recalibrating our expectations, but we just have to be conscious of kind of which bits of data to take seriously and which to maybe take with a pinch of salt.
Yes, I think some people, I think with those, that people can get a little bit obsessive over it is how I think. And actually, rather than connecting with their own sense of self, can actually be looking to a wearable to tell them what's going on in their physicality. So anyway, so obviously our beliefs shape our reality, and a good chunk of the book is about our potential reaction to medication, actually based on our beliefs. Could you just share some of the findings there with us, David?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the first thing I should mention is the placebo effect, which I've mentioned, but actually, I think there's a few elements of the placebo effect that are less well known. I think the first is that often this is producing objective changes. So, for example, someone taking a placebo painkiller actually starts producing their own endogenous painkillers. So if you have been used to taking morphine and then you're told that you're receiving an injection of morphine, your brain actually starts to produce its own opioids that can change the pain signaling. So, that's very powerful. And actually, when you're taking the real drug, even the expectation of having that relief is contributing and amplifying the pain relief that you receive. And, something like morphine, it seems about 50% of the pain relief actually comes from expectations. And we know that because you can give, it's huge. If you give people morphine without them realizing it, and then test their pain, it will go down a bit, but only by about half as much as it would if the doctor is there giving the reassurance as they actually give the injections. So, it's very powerful in all kind of clinical encounters, not just when, it's not only if you're being given a placebo in some laboratory experiment. The second thing is that actually placebos can work even when you know that you're receiving a placebo, and that can be quite powerful. There was a study from Portugal that has now been replicated, but they took people with chronic back pain and gave them a pill of placebo pills that clearly said placebo pills, take 2 a day. And then they gave the participants this kind of presentation about the expectation effect. So they gave them this knowledge that, positive expectations can help the brain to release its own endogenous opioids, that lots of people get this kind of significant pain relief, just from the belief that they're going to get better. And that information, combined with the ritual of then taking the placebo, seems to have been very empowering and actually did then reduce their pain symptoms by about 30%. Now that's a clinical threshold. So if you were testing a new drug, you'd want to see that it had a 30% reduction in symptoms before you kind of put it on the market. So, it's very significant. And for those people, they followed them up 5 years afterwards, and they found that actually even then they just showed better outcomes with their pain than people who had been on a waiting list, who hadn't actually gone through with that treatment and had just been receiving their treatment as normal. So actually, this experience of the open label placebos had a long-term effect. It actually seems to have helped them to cope mentally, but also physically with their pain.
Wow, amazing. I guess the flip side of this you talk about in the book is the nocebo effect, right? Where people, and I guess in this day and age as well, we have, as well as warnings with medicine about potential side effects, we also have our good friend Dr. Google, right? It's like, oh, I've got a tummy ache. Oh my goodness, it could be some sort of rare cancer. We can jump to the wrong conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge issue. So, this works through similar mechanisms to the placebo effect. So, it could be, rather than the production of those helpful opioids, it could be that you increase the molecule CCK, which actually amplifies the pain transmission. So that's going to make everything feel more uncomfortable. It could be that it's increasing inflammation in your body, which we know underlies a lot of illnesses. It could be changing the actions of your digestive system so that you start to suffer from digestive problems and show those physical symptoms. In all these ways, expectation of illness can actually create symptoms. One obvious place where this manifests is with drug side effects. So we know that when people are given placebo pills, believing that they're the real pills, they experience not only the benefits, but also the side effects that you would expect from the real drug. And that's actually very common. For some drugs, the majority of the side effects seem to come from the nocebo effect rather than from the direct chemical action of the drug. But like you say, there's all of these, problems that we have now with, like, looking at Dr. Google, reading about, mass media coverage of health scares is a huge problem for creating the nocebo effect. And it's thought that some food allergies may well be caused by the nocebo effect in some people, so not everyone, but say with a wheat allergy, some people will have a very, the direct physiological reaction to the wheat, the gluten protein, or the kind of other carbohydrates and sugars that accompany that gluten. But other people, it could just be the expectation of becoming ill from what they've read in the media. And for those people, I'm not saying that their symptoms aren't real. They are real, but it's created by the nocebo effect. And what this really shows us is that actually it almost doesn't make sense often to make this distinction between the, real and imaginary illnesses, because, no one who's suffering from the nocebo effect is just kind of faking it. They're actually experiencing all of the symptoms that they say they are. And even someone who's, having a physical reaction to an actual chemical like gluten, their expectations may also be making that worse. So there's very much this kind of blurring between the purely physical and the psychosomatic that's kind of present in all kinds of illnesses.
It's really important that you've said that, actually, and I think that will resonate with so many people, because it is, it's not that we're saying that they're not real. I think that's the really important thing to distinguish here. We're not saying that they're not real. They're experiencing those things, but there is that blurred line between the psychosomatic and the physical.
Yeah, exactly. And, I've suffered from a nocebo effect myself, I'm sure. Like when I was taking some antidepressant pills, my doctor told me, you might experience headaches as a result of taking these pills. And I did have bad headaches. And it was actually only when I discovered the science of the nocebo effect that I started questioning whether those headaches were inevitable or whether it had come from the doctor's warning. And actually opening my mind to that possibility did provide a lot of pain relief. They disappeared after about a day.
Yeah.
But, at the time, that pain was absolutely real. Like, it was actually very debilitating. And it's not like I was malingering or like, willing myself to feel it. Like I couldn't help feeling that pain, and it was horrible. And that's the same with all of these nocebo effects, is that, it's indistinguishable. And even physiologically, when people have a nocebo headache, you actually see changes in the brain's vasculature, just as if they were experiencing a real headache. So it's not like you can just kind of claim that an imaginary illness is less important than a kind of direct physical illness. Like, the discomfort is exactly the same, and even what's happening in the body is often exactly the same.
Well, I think you've just touched on something there that I experienced years ago when I was put on antidepressants. When I decided to come off them, I don't think it was the right way to do it at all, so I'm not recommending this, but I just decided to come off them cold turkey. And I remember everyone was saying, don't do that, you're going to have a really bad reaction, you'll feel very dizzy, you'll have all of these side effects. And guess what? I had every single side effect. But I think, even though I wasn't necessarily in this world as much as I am now doing what we do, I still had that perception of, or understanding, that it could be because I've been told all of those things. So like you, I kind of opened up my mind and thought, is this because I was expecting this reaction, and how much is it is actually physiologically true, and how much is it was I expecting it? So I
Right,
totally,
exactly.
yeah.
And it could have been, the two could have been very interlinked.
Yes, of course.
But I think that's what's good about knowing about the expectation effect, is that even, whatever discomfort you're feeling, changing your mindset can, very often reduce that discomfort, even if it's just changing the purely psychological component. And, we know there are studies, for example, of people who've undergone heart surgery, who had psychological therapy that just helped to kind of allay some of their worries about the surgery, explain, the mechanism of why it was going to be helpful, and then set out positive expectations for their recovery. So nothing like unrealistic, but just telling them, at this point, you might be able to kind of do this with your friends, or, you might be able to go on holiday by this point. And they found that compared to the very standard hospital treatment, those people, recovered more quickly, they left hospital more quickly, they returned to work more quickly, and crucially, that also corresponded to some physiological changes. So they had lower levels of inflammation, and that inflammation, in the other cohort, inflammation can just slow down recovery from surgery and can make you feel very unwell, so you don't feel so physically capable. So there's a kind of psychological but also a biological link there between the beliefs and the outcomes.
One thing I love about the book, apart from all the fascinating research in there, is that you end each chapter with a kind of recommendations, tips to how to apply it to your life. Like you mentioned there with your experience of the headaches, going, well, actually, now I've got awareness of this. Could it be that? And just bringing that awareness to it. So I love that there's always helpful tips. We're going to come on to, I guess, some of the positive ways you could use this. The first one I came to was, like, I love that study where people visualize strength gains, but they visualize lifting a table with their forearms. And even they weren't actually doing it, they saw strength gains over a period of time, even though they weren't actually doing any lifting. What I thought was really fascinating was the difference between the first person visualization and third person perspective. I think it was like an 11% on the first person and only 3% or something on the third person. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the third person, there just seemed to be this effect, but it wasn't statistically significant. So we can't actually be certain that for those people there was any benefit at all. But for the first person, yeah, absolutely, there was this 11% increase in strength, and that was, it was statistically significant. And this again seems kind of miraculous, but like with all of the expectation effects, it's like you just have to investigate the potential mechanism, and you realize that it's not as far-fetched as it might seem. In this case, what we know is happening when we're doing exercise is that the brain is constantly performing this calculation. It's basically measuring its own, the body's resources and the demands ahead of it, physical demands ahead of it, and then it's trying to kind of eke out its supplies enough that it's not going to suffer from serious exhaustion or injury. And then that's going to determine things like how many muscle fibers that you recruit when you do an exercise. Now, the brain is typically very conservative in these estimates, because it's much better to reduce performance than to risk having some kind of serious injury. And what the visualization seems to do is it's just shifting the kind of boundaries of that calculation a little bit to kind of encourage the brain maybe to devote more of its resources to the exercise and to recruit more of those muscle fibers. So these participants, they were just visualizing lifting the table, like you said, daily for about a month, and then they saw this strength gain. And it doesn't seem to be that they had built muscle, but simply that their brain was telling the muscles that they could recruit more of the fibers that were currently available to do that lifting. And that's still really important, for someone who's in rehabilitation, say because they've broken their arm, this can stop them from losing so much of their strength while they're resting without doing exercise. Especially important for athletes who just want to have that kind of edge. Michael Phelps believed that doing these visualization exercises just helped him to win all those gold medals. He actually believed that he wasn't physically superior to the other swimmers, but he just had the edge mentally with his powers of visualization.
I love that. I mean, visualization is a tool that we use all the time. We use with our clients. We find it so powerful. There's a couple of like interesting paradoxes in your book as well. So there's the food paradox and the happiness paradox. Let's talk on the food paradox. This is where you would, if I get this right, you actually help people like eat less or curb cravings by labeling food as more indulgent rather than labeling it as restrictive, which I found.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And it's been shown multiple times, often tracking different mechanisms. I mean, one of my favorite studies actually looked at people, they just offered them like different types of chocolate cake, and they could have, a small portion, a medium portion, or a large portion. They changed the labeling depending on the conditions. So in some cases, it was just a plain kind of label calling it, chocolate cake. The other like really focused on the delicious flavors, like how much they would enjoy it. Now, you might think that that would encourage people to have the bigger slice, but actually the opposite was true. People were happier to have the smaller price and even to pay more money for that smaller slice. And what seems to be happening there is that just, once you start really thinking about how enjoyable that cake is going to be, you realize you don't need to have so much of it to get the pleasure that you want. So you just choose the one that's healthier for you while still giving you that enjoyment. Now, my other favorite experiment actually showed that having this kind of indulgent mindset can also change your physiological response to the food. It can change levels of the hormone ghrelin. Now, ghrelin, as you probably know, stimulates appetite. So what typically happens if you're it's in the evening and you're going to have a big dinner, is it spikes just before you eat and then it drops quite dramatically, because once you've had that satisfaction of eating, your body's got all the nutrients it needs. You don't need to carry on seeking food, so the body can reduce the appetite and the food seeking behavior. Now, what this study did was it measured ghrelin levels while these participants were eating 2 milkshakes on different occasions. Now, they were labeled very differently, but they were nutritionally identical. But one was labeled as this kind of boring health shake, it had a very literally vanilla description of its flavor. Focused all on the things it was missing, like, it was low carbs, low sugar, low fat. The other one focused, like with those cakes, on all of the kind of delicious flavors, how much cream it had, how much ice cream it had. It was decadent, it was indulgent. It's very much like Nigella Lawson might describe food, focusing on the pleasure and enjoyment that you should be getting from it. And, those labels alone changed the ghrelin response. So for the health shake, there was barely any change in the ghrelin. It just didn't peak or drop in the way that you would expect after eating about 600 calories, which is, a fair snack, actually. For the indulgent milkshake, the ghrelin changed exactly as you would expect from a really satisfying meal. So it did peak and then it dropped. Now, I think with the hormonal response to that health shake, that's really the opposite of what you want if you're on a diet. You don't want to be consuming calories but have no physiological change, no response to what you've eaten, because that's only going to leave you feeling hungry, more hungry and less satisfied later on. So you're more likely to be looking for snacks, So I think that really shows us how when we're dieting, like, we shouldn't be looking for those bland foods just because they're low calorie. We should actually make things like pleasure, flavor, texture, that should take like the utmost importance when we're dieting. It should actually be our priority, because by doing that, combined with calorie restriction, is how we're really going to get over those hunger pangs.
I love this. Is going to be, our listeners are going to absolutely love that. I mean, I'm sitting here grinning from ear to ear, because that's just, it's so fascinating, isn't it? Like all the hormonal response to how we view food. So also you talk about the happiness paradox as well. So the food paradox and the happiness paradox, and how feeling pressured to be happy or positive can be a cause of stress. So how should we draw the line between like that genuine and faux positivity, would you say?
Yeah, I think that was an issue while I was writing the book. And because so basically, like, some of these studies have shown that, you pile up the lab with all of these books on like you know, the importance of happiness, how to be happy, you know, posters kind of giving these inspirational messages about how happiness is within your control. And actually what happens is that those participants with the pressure of feeling happy, they their own enjoyment of things like, you know, watching a funny film actually drops because they want too much out of it, and then they feel disappointed that it's not bringing the kind of joy that they expected. And also then it means that they're more critical when they feel disappointed. And, you know, disappointment is an inevitable part of life. You know, we're not always going to get what we want immediately when we want it. But if you're always like pursuing happiness and you think happiness is your number one goal, then when you do feel something like disappointment, it, you know, that pressure to feel happy actually exacerbates your feelings of sadness.
Makes so much sense.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is really important, but like you say, it is a paradox, because how can we escape? How can we try to be happy without putting ourselves under so much pressure that we end up not being happy at all? And I don't think there's like a single answer to that, but I do think one thing that we should just accept is that, like, we need to just be more accepting of all of those other emotions that we feel, and actually to recognize that they can convey important messages, and we might not enjoy feeling them, but they're actually an important part of our emotional life. So something like disappointment is important because it's teaching you, you know, that it's teaching you what was important. The feeling of being disappointment shows that your goal was important to you, but it's also then telling you that you need to take another route to get there. So we can't just ignore disappointment, and we shouldn't be seeing it as something that's purely negative, because it's actually teaching us this important message. And that's true for all kinds of emotions. Even something like anger can actually be quite motivating and energizing. I think we have all experienced this, that if you feel angry, sometimes that can, you know, you want to kind of prove, you know, if someone's like criticized you, you want to prove them wrong, and you can channel the anger constructively. But just recognizing that fact can actually be very beneficial. People who acknowledge and accept and see the positive meaning behind negative emotions tend to have better mental health and also better physical health. So, you know, that's very robust now. There's actually, rather than shying away from bad feelings, we need to embrace them. With the caveat, of course, that if you're experiencing them over an extended period of time, and, you know, you find that this situation is escalating, that you should seek, you know, psychological help and treatment. But actually, if you're experiencing these transient emotions, we don't need to fear them. We can actually just sit with them.
And honestly, I love that. I love what you're saying, because I think we have been told to kind of fear those emotions, haven't we, as well? It's almost like, if I can bury those, they don't exist. But actually, I always love this little phrase, what we resist persists. So exactly. A lot of the time they get more and more and more, but then we're trying to be happy and we're trying to block those out and pretend they don't exist. And no wonder we end up feeling exhausted and stressed out, and like we're falling short constantly. So I love what you said, and I think that's definitely something that I've grown into, is looking at the shadow side of our emotions, becoming almost friends with those, not being afraid of them, because they have got something to teach us.
Yeah, exactly. I love that kind of looking at the shadows. You know, that's a beautiful way of describing it. And I think this is also about recognizing the kind of common humanity of what we're feeling, which is easy to forget. But actually, all of these, you know, bad emotions, like, part of the human experience. And I think the way they've been portrayed sometimes is that it's like as if you're, you know, wrong to be feeling sad or disappointed or frustrated. But actually, everyone feels that at some point. And I find that can, you know, when I feel like socially anxious sometimes, or if I feel like a friend has disappointed me, I can start to think like, you know, in the past I might have thought, well, what is wrong with me? Like, to, you know, as if I was the only person who'd ever been disappointed by a friend. But obviously, you know, it's just part of having a social life, is that sometimes people don't live up to your expectations, and also that there are multiple reasons why, you know, events can occur. And, you know, the research shows that just practicing that self-compassion and just recognizing that, yeah, like, you might be a bit disappointed, but like, everyone feels this at some point. There's nothing unusual about you feeling that way. And there might be other explanations for, you know, what you're feeling as well. You know, the research is so robust with that actually practicing this self-compassion can be incredibly good for our well-being, and it's much more important than, say, trying to boost your self-esteem by trying to feel that you're like the best and better than everyone else.
Yeah, I love that. I think also the gratitude thing comes into that as well. Like sometimes we can think, oh, I should be grateful. I've got to be grateful. You know, like, I've got to do my gratitude list. We've had this experience. I've got to be grateful. I've got to write down my 3 things. And I'm really bad if I don't feel grateful. But on the flip side of that, I think also sometimes when we're trying to be happy, trying to get to destination happiness, actually just bringing it back home, this is where gratitude does work in my experience and our experience with clients, is actually just to say, okay, yes, I am trying to be happy. I want to be happy, but what could I be happy about that I have in my life right now without expecting something else externally to make me happy? Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I've read some recent research showing that, you know, there's an optimum dose of a gratitude journal, and actually to list 10 things every day is not, it's not that more is better. Actually, trying to list 10 things every day is going to make you feel worse, because often we don't have 10 things that really have given us joy in a day. But like you say, I think, you know, if you do it kind of sparingly, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and also if you focus on the small things, you know, like sometimes it would just be that I had a really nice cup of coffee and that kind of improved my morning. You know, I think that being more, you know, realistic about it and not feeling that you have to always be kind of joyous to make the most of your life. Yeah.
I love that you said that, David. What a lovely conversation.
Obviously, our audience are midlifers, and one of the things that preoccupies them is aging. So, what's the research say about aging, and perhaps how you can keep a more youthful mindset? So, it's like age is not just a number, and actually that fascinating research you have about actually how long you expect to live.
Yeah. I mean, you know, this really blew my mind when I came across the research on aging, but, you know, it occupies my thoughts a lot even today. Like, it's something that I think, you know, along with the other research, but this has really changed my attitudes to aging, and I've become so much more conscious of, you know, the ageism that we see in our society. But essentially, you know, there's very robust research from multiple studies showing that attitudes to aging can shape longevity. It started in 2002 with a big study by Becca Levy, who showed that, you know, measuring people's attitudes to aging in midlife, she asked them whether life would get better, stay the same, or get worse as they got older. Their responses then predicted, you know, how long they would live decades later. The difference between those who had the more positive expectations and those who had the negative expectations was 7.5 years. So a huge part of your life expectancy. Now that's been replicated. You know, we know, for example, that people with the positive views of aging are also more likely to, about twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. And that's, you know, even when you account for genetic risk, even those with the highest genetic risk are more likely to develop Alzheimer's if they have the negative views of aging, and less likely if they have the positive views of aging. We know the mechanisms. Again, it's not miraculous or magical, but it's actually, you know, partly linked to behavior. If you're positive about aging, you're more likely to do exercise, stay active, have a good diet, look after yourself. If you have a more defeatist attitude to aging, you might just kind of stop trying to look after your body. But equally, there's a kind of response that involves levels of the stress hormones in your body. And again, this makes intuitive sense that if you expect to feel vulnerable as you get older, that actually just makes all of your kind of challenges you're facing feel a bit more stressful. So going to the post office, meeting new people, driving to a location you don't know, all of that feels more threatening because you might worry that you're going to have a fall or get lost or forget someone's name. So you see levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, rising in the people with the negative views of aging and dropping in the people with the positive views of aging. That's then linked to things like inflammation, and we know that chronic inflammation over, you know, months and years can contribute to all kinds of illnesses like cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's disease. And then we can even see these changes within the cells themselves. So actually, your attitudes to aging seem to be linked to the epigenetic clock within cells. So that clock is just ticking a bit more quickly if you have those negative views of aging. And that's through all of those mechanisms I've mentioned. You know, stress and inflammation probably will accelerate the epigenetic aging of your cells. You know, we know it causes wear and tear, and that over time that's going to lead to a greater risk of illness. So, you know, they've really looked at every kind of link in this chain. It's very, you know, very convincing to me. And so I think, like, you know, we know that beliefs about aging in general are important, but also beliefs about when old age starts seem to have an effect. So people, there was a huge longitudinal study of people working in Whitehall in the UK that tracked these civil servants over decades, and they found that people who believed that old age begins at 60 were more likely, were less likely to die over the study period than people who thought that old age started at a younger age, at 50. And to me, that's all linked to these, it's probably an interaction of the negative age beliefs combined with when you think negative age kicks in. So if you fear aging and then you think it's starting at an earlier age, you've just got longer, a longer period where you're beginning to feel, you know, defeated and vulnerable and pessimistic, and then that's going to accelerate your aging.
Amazing.
Wow, that's fascinating. I mean, I guess a learning from that, people, is like, it sounds easy to say, it's not easy to change, but yeah, don't fear aging, and start to work on developing a positive mindset to it. And one thing we talk about is, you know, staying curious and staying in a growth mindset. I think as we age, there's a lot of research out there says we become more risk averse and we tend to like shrink into ourselves. Actually, we want to be doing the opposite. We want to be kind of pushing out and growing and learning new things. Again, I'm sure there's research out there that says if we learn new skills, new languages, that helps the brain actually like slow down the aging process for the brain as well. So
yeah,
listeners, you've heard it, research, have a positive attitude to aging, and start taking the steps that go along with it. Like start looking after your health in tandem. So as we said at the beginning, it's not just about your beliefs, it's about the actions you take as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's the two in combination that's so important. You know, I often think of it being like, you can have all the good intentions, and I include myself in this, of say doing, you know, exercising like 5 days a week. And, you know, you can carry that out. But if you have the negative expectations of your fitness, that's just going to have fewer benefits to your health than if you have the positive expectations of your own fitness. So, you know, it's like taking the brakes off of your progress, essentially. That's how I see this. And I think, you know, with aging especially, that's really important, that recognizing that, you know, aging is inevitable, but actually you do have some autonomy and control over what your aging looks like. So if you do exercise, you know, that is definitely going to you know, make the process easier. If you push yourself out of your comfort zone, that's going to you know, make those years potentially a time of excitement and growth rather than, you know, fear and decline. You know, all of that's important. And I spoke to some, you know, wonderful people like Paddy Jones, the world's oldest acrobatic salsa dancer, who only began, you know, doing her professional dancing in her 60s after her husband had died. And, you know, when I'm thinking about my own kind of future, I really like to kind of think of people like Paddy, and I hope they'll be like that. They'll always be looking for new challenges.
I love that. I love that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So, David, what was the most interesting or staggering thing? This is going to put you on the spot here. What was the most interesting or staggering thing you learned while researching the book? I mean, so much, but what would you say was the most interesting and staggering?
So I do think the work on aging was the one I started out the most skeptical of that research, but then, you know, looking at the sheer amount of research that had been done and how they'd like meticulously tracked each stage of this kind of mechanism, linking beliefs to epigenetic aging, I found that absolutely staggering. Yeah, and in terms of like, so basically I've tested like everything in my book myself. Like I don't really write about any technique you could use unless I use it myself, and because I want to know that it is practical to do so. And for that, I do think like the really changing the way I appraise fitness had the biggest impact for me. So there's, you know, lots of research showing that your attitudes to your own fitness can determine your performance, but also how much you suffer or enjoy your exercise, and that can be linked to everything from like objective measures of the oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange within your lungs to the release of those endorphins that give you that runner's high afterwards. And again, I'm not saying go to the gym and imagine that you're like an Olympic athlete and immediately you're going to kind of lose weight and like develop superhuman strength and become a world champion. But actually, having those miraculous changes isn't what's important. It's actually just getting you to enjoy your workouts, to see improvements in your performance, and to start on that positive trajectory. And that's absolutely what I experienced. And I did that just by questioning some assumptions that I'd brought with me from school, where I really didn't enjoy PE and didn't feel like I was very good at it. But I just started questioning, well, like, why do I think that? I was actually the youngest in my year, so obviously I was going to struggle to compete with kids who were pretty much a year older.
Same, David.
Yeah, exactly. But I'd never really thought of it in those terms before. And then there's just the enormous scientific literature showing that no matter kind of how good you are at exercise, the more of it you do, the healthier you're going to be. So actually not comparing myself to other people, but just focusing on like the day-to-day improvements that I was making. And finally, just reframing the sensations of exercise. So whereas in the past, when I was on the treadmill feeling quite out of breath, my muscles were aching, I might have seen that as a sign of failure. It was kind of proof of these assumptions that I wasn't cut out for exercise. But of course, there's another equally true way of interpreting those sensations, and that is just that you're actually pushing your body to its limit, and that it's growing, it's getting stronger, and that is actually essential for the improvements I wanted to make. So they were actually a positive sign of growth. And the research shows this, and my experience backs it up, that actually all of that can just make the process of working out so much more enjoyable. And I really did see much bigger improvements, like gains from the efforts that I was putting in just through this change of mindset.
Amazing. Well,
huge
kudos to you for actually walking your talk, actually, and applying. Like you said, I think it's a really important thing that you said. You actually apply the principles in the book to your own life so that you can authentically talk about them in a way that has touched your own life. And I think that's really, really important. But I think so many people will relate to the fitness thing, and especially what you said about reframing oh my goodness, I'm out of breath, everything's aching. Well, I think some people, if they've not been used to exercise, especially that we work with, if they've not been used to exercise, there's a level of confidence that comes with just over time understanding that feeling isn't something to be scared of. It's not unsafe. It's actually reframing it and thinking, oh my goodness, like my lung capacity is getting better. My VO2 max, I'm starting to feel healthier. This is a good thing. And it's about the stories we tell ourselves, right?
Yeah, it really is about the stories we tell ourselves. And it's like, again, it's not to do with like deceiving yourself. Like it's factually true that when you're experiencing those sensations, that is just what happens when you work out, and that is building your strength. But it's easy to forget that, and we go down this route of catastrophic thinking where we criticizing ourselves and fearing what's happening because we don't really understand it. And actually just like having a basic grasp of like the kind of facts of sports science can really help with that, I think.
Awesome. David, thank you so much for your time on this, and the book is incredible. We'll put a link to the book in the show notes. But what's next for you? What are you up to next, and where can listeners get in touch with you or find out more about you?
So I'm currently working on my third book, which won't be out for another couple of years probably, but this is about social connection and all of the kind of psychological barriers that we have in place that can prevent us from forming genuine, authentic relationships with the people around us. And people can find out about me on Twitter, _A_Robson. And also they can visit my website, www.davidrobson.me, where there are lots of links, for places to buy my book, if you don't want to use Amazon, but also links to previous articles that I've written that touch on the points we've spoken about.
Well, I'll put all of those links in the show notes anyway,
Well,
so you won't have to
sounds...
you won't have to remember that. But
I'll put them all in the show notes. But that next book sounds fascinating.
Doesn't it?
Thank you.
So excited to read all the research that comes out of that as well.
Thank you.
It's been so full of all the fascinating stuff that we absolutely love. So thank you for just expanding on all of that and just making us all very, very excited about hearing it. Thank you.
Oh, no, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks
thank
again.
you, David.
Yeah.
You've been listening to the Midlife Mentors with Claire and James Davis.
We'd love to hear from you, so drop us a line at info@themidlifementors.com with any questions or topic suggestions.
And make sure you join us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can find us under the Midlife Mentors.
Yeah.